Hello and welcome back to the Karma Stories podcast. I'm Rob and I hope you are having a wonderful day today. Today I have 4 stories for you from the Malicious Compliance subreddit. The Karma Stories podcast is published to all major podcasting platforms, and you can also read along on YouTube under our @Karma Stories podcast handle. If you have a story you'd like to submit to the podcast, you can do so by email at karmastoriespod@gmail.com. Today's episode is sponsored by my 3D printing website. Visit dangly3d.com, where you can get your hands on your very own 3D printed Carmen Chameleon Karma Stories channel mascot. And yes, it comes complete with cookies. Again, that's dangly3d.com. Alright, on to today's stories. Let's jump right in. This story comes to us from Helown, the parking feud that finally got a solid solution. Hopefully a good one for you. A few details are changed for anonymity. I work at a niche retail store located in the heart of town. Our customers are dedicated and often travel from afar just to visit us. So having a clear and accessible parking lot is crucial for our business. Unfortunately, our next door neighbors, a family-run landscaping and garden supply store, have been a thorn in our side for years when it comes to parking. The tension between my boss and the landscaping store owner goes back over a decade before I joined, all over something trivial. I know the landscaper once complained about a tree on our side of the lot, which was unsightly for their customers. It was the pettiest neighbor drama you could imagine, but it festered for years. The final straw came after the Rona, when the physical business in town started picking back up and our parking lot started overflowing with cars again, many belonging to the landscaping store's customers. See, our 2 parking lots are connected. Ours is about twice the size of his, but the landscaper had decided to reserve almost all his spots for his landscaping vans. Ironically, these vans are rarely even there during business hours. As a result, his customers just parked in our lot, leaving us with few spaces for our own customers. My boss, trying to be reasonable, approached the landscaper with a suggestion. Maybe they could adjust their parking setup to free up a few more spaces for customers, and that their vans were welcome to park in our lot if their lot was overfull. But the landscaper shot down the idea immediately, insisting that it was absolutely crucial to reserve all of those spaces for his vans, even though they were rarely there during the day. The conversation turned heated, ending with my boss threatening to put up a fence to separate the lots and enforce parking. The landscaper, practically daring him, shot back, "Go ahead," probably knowing how expensive that would be. As you can imagine, it ended with both men storming off and not speaking for 2 years. Typical neighbor stuff. Fast forward to recently, and we got a golden opportunity when a parking management company approached us with a proposal. They offered to install automated license plate cameras to enforce parking, allowing us to fine vehicles that stayed beyond a generous 3-hour free window if they hadn't paid. The setup would be free, we'd get most of the revenue, and they would keep any fines issued. It was perfect, especially since we were losing space to freeloaders, wouldn't really impact the customers of the nearby stores, and if anyone had a good reason to park there for longer, then we could give them an extension at our discretion. However, for the cameras to work, they needed to cover both our entrance and the landscaping store's entrance. Being the considerate neighbor, again, my boss had the parking company rep reach out to the landscaper to explain the deal and benefits. But true to form, the landscaper didn't even let the rep finish before kicking him out, making it very clear, that under no circumstances would his lot become a paid parking zone. Instead of going through the hassle of putting up the necessary expensive fence, my boss had a better idea. Big rocks. One of his construction buddies had a stash of leftover rocks from a recent project and offered to place them for a great price. The parking company even agreed to front the cost to be repaid through future parking revenue. On Monday morning, before opening hours, one of the buddy's employees, a big burly guy with arms like tree trunks, arrived with a truck and crane to place the rocks. The rocks were neatly spaced to allow pedestrians to pass with carts, but completely blocked vehicle access. The landscaper stormed out, yelling and trying to intimidate the worker into stopping. But the worker, unfazed, calmly told him to step back for his own safety, which made the much smaller landscaper back down and retreat in frustration. The rocks weren't just a physical barrier, they quickly became a mental obstacle for the landscaper's employees. Their muscle memory kept bringing them into our lot, only for them to realize too late that they couldn't drive through anymore. We watched from our newly installed surveillance cameras just in case the neighbor tried anything, trying not to burst out laughing as their vans ended up awkwardly stuck. They'd have to reverse out and go all the way around to their own entrance, only to perform a series of painful maneuvers to squeeze into their now much smaller parking area. At one point, we even caught one of their rushing vans clipping a rock while trying to maneuver. A little bonus for our viewing pleasure. The next day, the parking company arrived to install the license plate cameras and set up the signage, which took a few hours. Throughout the installation, the landscaper's family members were prowling around our lot, snapping photos and videos as if they were on a mission to find a violation. But the parking company was very professional and had done everything by the book, so there was nothing for them to report. In the meantime, my boss was positively glowing with satisfaction as he helped direct the installation. Here's the best part, we noticed that the neighbor's family had started parking their personal vehicles in our lot, likely out of spite to mess with us. One day, my coworker saw one of the family members dash out of their store and sprint to their car. We thought it was odd at the time, but didn't think much of it until the following week, when the landscaper's son came into our store looking a bit embarrassed. Apparently, he had accidentally overstayed the 3-hour limit and received a $150 fine. The son practically begged us to waive it, insisting it was just a simple mistake. My boss politely responded, "Oh, I'd really love to help, but it's out of our control now. The parking company handles all the fines." The look on his face was priceless. He left, shoulders slumped, retreating back to their store. Ever since, our lot has been blissfully clear, and our customers have had no trouble finding spaces. Meanwhile, the landscapers have been grumbling as they have a harder time maneuvering their vans, still trying to pretend they're not bothered. As for my boss, he's been smiling a lot more lately. Sometimes the best revenge is simply letting people get exactly what they asked for. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, we have one from a user who is absolutely after my heart with this one. They're called Sordo Crabs, and they said, "The landscaping dude should have known what happens when you put a neighbor between a rock and a hard place." You know, I can actually think of a few places in town here, stores that I like to go to every once in a while, where the people that own the stores or work at the stores take the prime parking spots right in front of the building that would have been best for the customers, and they really don't care. There's ample parking around back for them, but they choose to park right up front where those customers really want to park their cars. I'm guessing that actually hurts their business more than they might think. I think the only thing that would have made this story better and actually kinda hilarious is if OP's boss originally put in the order for the rocks with the landscaping company next door. And when they asked where they wanted them, they would say, right down the edge of our parking lot, just to see the look on their face. That would have been priceless. This story comes to us from Sivrin R. Is the cable live? Then let me finish it myself. This one is from my early days when I was working as a technician for an internet provider company, but it still brings a smile to my face when I remember it. And recently had a technician coming to install my internet, and it all came back. I was working mostly residential buildings, and my job at that time was pretty simple. Come to the basement, find our distribution box, patch the cable to the right endpoint for the requesting flat, go to the flat, fix cable outlet when needed, verify cable is live, there is a signal coming through and it's the right signal, this is somewhat important, connect modem, verify all good, tell the happy customer the internet is ready to use, and off I go. One day, I'm doing my job again, but got this know-it-all guy. Had to call him to let me in the building, and it was a blast right from the start. First, he told me he knew exactly where my company distribution box is, only to lead me to the electricity provider box. Then, he is absolutely sure that his flat number is X, while the papers state Y, and indeed it was why. There were a few more helps from his side, which I skipped to avoid this becoming a book. But eventually we are up in the flat and I'm going to check the signal. But the guy is like, come on, hurry up, need my connection, need to work on super important stuff. I tell him I need to test the signal first, but here he opens up my malicious compliance window. He says, you do not need to do that, just connect the cable. If the cable is live, just go and I will finish it myself. I still give him a chance by explicitly stressing that test will take some minutes only, but if it does not work, I will not be able to come back earlier than in a couple of days. No, absolutely not, he can finish it by himself. Okay, my man, you've got it. Already too long story, to make it short, cable was live, but the signal was from local TV antenna, not from our cable internet. This was actually a relatively common issue at that time. Older residential buildings, reused wiring, cable patching to a wrong one, and was not so hard to fix once you knew what was wrong. I can only imagine what the guy did to try and make it work before calling our call center to schedule my visit again. What I know is, I came to the flat 3 days later, only to be greeted by his lovely wife, which made me some tea and thanked me for being kind and fixing the problem. To come to a closure, when a technician came to install my internet a few days ago, I made him some tea and told him to take his time and do all that's needed. We had a little chat, and guess what? The process and issues are still the same. And recently he was telling his junior colleague why checking if the cable is live is not enough. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, we have one from a user called Stage Party. It says, people like this are hilarious. In the time it takes for them to argue with you, you could have done the job and left. But no, they must argue. I like to call that the child mentality because that's the exact same thing that my kids do when we ask them to clean up. They spend more time complaining about cleaning up than they do actually doing the cleaning up itself. But no matter how much you try to explain that to them, it just doesn't register. OP, sorry you had to deal with the big man-child, but the fact that you walked out and said, okay, that was the best way to deal with it. Let them deal with their own mistakes. This story comes to us from 50 Many Questions. I can't give students a 0 for using AI unless I have proof? No problem. I'm a high school English teacher. I have two major annoyances when it comes to kids doing work. First, a lot of kids don't read or listen to directions. Assignment instructions are written on the papers and I read them out loud, but I still have students asking me, what are we doing? That's no big deal though. It's a pretty normal thing to deal with this as a teacher. The real issue bugging me is students cheating on writing assignments using ChatGPT. I'm pretty good at spotting AI-generated essays, but the problem is that when I try to accuse students of using AI, they deny it. They act outraged that I would accuse them even though we both know they're playing dumb. I usually just give them a 0 and move on with my life, but there's always the fear that one of them might take the issue to administration. If they did, I'm not confident that admin would back me up. It's hard to prove something is AI generated, and these days, the higher-ups are more likely to side with the student. So I hatched a plan. I gave an open-ended creative writing assignment. The direction said to write a story about anything you want, and then answer some questions about the story you wrote. The thing is, when you ask ChatGPT, tell me a story, it always spits out the exact same story. About a girl named Alara who lives in the woods. Once upon a time, in a small village nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, there lived a young woman named Alara. She was known throughout the village for her curiosity and sense of adventure, always eager to explore the world beyond the familiar paths of her home. So, in slightly smaller print under the instructions I wrote, if your main character's name is Alara, minus 99 points. Lo and behold, I got 1 or 2 kids turn in a story about a girl named Alara who lives in woods. When I turned back the papers with a grade of 1 out of 100, because I find that stings more than a 0, the kids predictably asked why. And all I had to do was point to the instructions that they didn't read. There was no need to mention AI, we both knew what they did. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, we have one from a user called Squirrely Girly. It says, when I was in college, I had an ethics professor catch a student cheating. This was way back before AI, but people could still find papers online. The student denied he cheated, but the professor showed him where he found it online and pointed to the name of the author. It was the professor. Another commenter down below called Porcrine said, the best example of this that I saw was a professor who distributed their assignments online. In the middle of the instructions, in tiny white-on-white text, was a prompt to cite a particular source. ChatGPT doesn't care if the text is invisible, it goes ahead and cites the mentioned author, who, as it turns out, is the professor's cat. You know, if a teacher really wanted to stop the AI problem in their classroom, all they'd really have to do is make all writing of essays and whatnot in-class assignments where they have to write them down on paper. I understand that people can utilize AI in good ways and it will help us out in some ways, but I also think that if we have something that does all the thinking for us, that we're not exercising that muscle of a brain that we have. And what happens when you don't exercise a muscle? Well, it atrophies. That same thing can happen with your brain if you're just not using it. This story comes to us from Mr. Coco1234. My boss wanted efficiency, so I gave him just that. I've been working in my field for a while, and I've always taken pride in doing a thorough, reliable job. I'm a high performer, and had a solid track record with my previous bosses, who valued quality and consistency. But then Eric became our new boss, and things took a hard turn. Eric was all about efficiency. He came from a startup environment where things didn't need to be perfect, just right and fast. He wanted things done fast, even if it meant cutting corners. In meetings, he'd throw around phrases like, time is money, and every second counts. Sure, efficiency is important, but Eric took it to an extreme. He didn't care about the quality of our work, he just wanted it done now. Nuances, quality checks, and double checking went right out the window. Then, he decided to implement a time tracking and output policy. This meant logging every task we worked on with specific time limits. Anything taking longer than his arbitrary limits was flagged, and we'd have to explain ourselves in a weekly efficiency review. Essentially, the new rule was, don't need to do it completely right, just do it fast. I tried explaining to him that rushing through things would lead to mistakes, but Eric insisted this would maximize productivity. Frustrated but willing to play by his rules, I decided I'd give him exactly what he asked for. If Eric wanted speed, I'd deliver speed. I stopped double checking everything. Tasks that normally took an hour to review and refine, I was now completing in 15 minutes, barely glancing at them. Documents that required analysis, I'd throw some data together and call it a day. Anything that usually got a thorough review now only got a quick single pass, tops. Naturally, errors began cropping up. Typos, incorrect numbers, misplaced data, bad presentations. Mistakes were popping up everywhere. But technically, I was working exactly within Eric's time limits. Eric was thrilled with how much faster I was working, and started bragging in meetings about how efficient our team had become. Then, the clients started to notice. One of our biggest accounts found a major error in a document I'd whipped together at record speed. That led to an awkward phone call with Eric. More issues came up, and after about 2 weeks of optimized efficiency, I got called into his office with his boss. Eric, visibly irritated, asked me why the quality of my work had taken such a nosedive. I calmly explained that I was meeting all of his time limits exactly as instructed. I told him that quality work requires time, which I simply didn't have under his new policy. Eric sat there in silence, realizing his policy had backfired. His boss stared at him, completely stunned and red in the face. After an awkward pause, Eric muttered about re-evaluating the time limits on tasks. The efficiency policy quietly disappeared soon after. Now I'm back to doing my job properly. Eric's under performance review, and his boss is closely involved with all our operations, especially with big clients. Why reinvent the wheel when things are working fine? And why try to rein in the high performers to stamp your authority? Jumping down to the comment section on this one, we have one from a user called DevCatOTA. It says, I work for a subsidiary of AT&T, and they sent us a poster that read, if you don't have the time to do it right the first time, when will you have the time to fix it? I think I can summarize this story very quickly with just a few words. The choices are on time, under budget, or bug-free, but you can only have two. If you enjoy daily Reddit stories, I encourage you to follow and add us to your favorites on whichever podcasting platform you enjoy the most. And if you're watching and listening on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button and drop a like on the video. It really helps us out. I thank you for watching and listening. I hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you tomorrow.